Welcome to Uncorked, a Cult Wines podcast. And I'm your host, Tom Gearing, co-founder and CEO of Cult Wines. And I'm joined, as ever, by my co-host, Jonathan Stevenson.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you too. And this week we have Sean joining us, and he is our fine wine buyer at Cult Wines. We're very excited to have him here on the podcast, and we will be talking around a number of different subjects. So on this podcast, there's been quite a few things going on in the market. First of all, we've got the September releases. So we'll be sort of dissecting what's been going on there, looking at the different trends and pricing and giving our opinion about how successful that September release campaign has been going. We're also going to be looking at the alternative asset world and looking at sort of the performance of wine and whiskey and art and other collectibles to see what sort of trends we've seen over the last few years and if there's some interesting takeaways. We'll also be asking our guests and Jonathan their investment picks. And finally, we'll be answering some listener questions. So we've got a show packed full of content. Really excited to get stuck into the podcast this week.
Welcome, Sean.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be an interesting, I think, since the last pod, we've had some, as Tom said, some really interesting ongoings that I think we're looking to dive into. But the guest is always best. So, Sean, can you just give us a little bit of an introduction, really? I mean, you started out studying politics and international studies. How did that then pivot? How did you then decide to pivot into wine after that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a pivot, I think you'd say, but not as different as you'd think. But I think for me, wine was a passion before it was a job and a career. And I think that's true of so many people.
Right.
That obviously there aren't many 15, 16, 17-year-olds mapping out their life plan and going, I want to go into wine. Might be a bit concerning if they were, I think.
Yeah.
So for me, it was very much...
What are you trying to say?
It was very much, I discovered wine as a passion in my early 20s. And I think quite immediately realized that this is just something I want to do. This is something I want to learn about. And I think initially it was, I want to learn about it and I want to sort of understand this thing.
Yeah.
And then eventually it became, I think, quite clear to me that really, this was something I just wanted to spend my life doing and learning about. And there's an obvious way to do that, which is try and work in wine.
But I think, when you go to university, especially when you study things like, politics, I studied history. Obviously, Arash was on a previous pod with us, and our colleague studied politics as well. I think, certainly with those types of degrees, at the end of the day, I actually see quite a lot of parallels to the wine industry, because you just think about the history of wine, or even some of the things we'll talk about today, like what's happened with Chateau Lafleur leaving, the Bordeaux appellation. Like, a lot of what happens in wine has been born out of kind of this tension between people, and it's kind of quite highly politicized. Everyone has quite strong opinions. You've got these regulations. You've got this sort of friction between landowners and winemakers and, regulatory bodies. So in a way, I think kind of from my perspective, I came from a history perspective, which of course you can easily see the parallels between history and wine. But I also think in a way, like, politics kind of provides quite an interesting groundwork to kind of understanding, the patchwork quilt that is the wine industry today and has been for, the last 50 to 100 years.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think you touched on it quite well there when you were talking about the different structures that exist.
Yeah.
And I think particularly from an international relations standpoint, which is not to bore all of our listeners, but is essentially all about these interlinking structures across the world that affect each other in different ways. And wine, from distribution to sales to production, financing, is all interlinked. And I think there's a lot of overlap there.
And absolutely, look, I mean, I don't want to bore our listeners to death because we've already talked about the tariffs this year, but like, that's a perfect example of how, Trump and the tariffs and something that was very highly political can impact the wine industry, and obviously something that's affected the market in quite a big way. So it's a perfect example of that.
And we talked last episode around, how important it is for these brands to have a global appeal and, the ebbs and flows of tariffs, but not just tariffs. The state of economy in these different nations is heavily a driver for, where the wines are going to be, successful, basically. But I mean, obviously your studying hasn't stopped there, Sean. So within wine, you now find yourself studying for the diploma.
Yep. Yeah, I'm currently doing my WSET diploma, pretty much halfway through at the moment, which means I've done a number of exams and have one very big one to go, but that's a little way off now. But it's exciting. I think
How's it structured? So you got theory, practical. What's the balance between kind of the different?
So I'd say,
parts
I think
you have
when
to-
you start out
Yeah.
doing diploma, but WSET at any level, I think they start with the grounding of theory, and that always comes first,
Yeah.
which I think can be a little bit of an adjustment period for some people who are used to learning about wine by drinking it and sort of knowing what they enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think WSET emphasizes sort of the theory first and always sort of focusing on why things are the way they are and focusing on qualitative rather than judgmental factors.
I mean, like for our listeners at home, for people that are kind of wine curious, wine enthusiastic, or maybe at the earlier stage of their kind of learning, like what's your advice in terms of, because clearly you've done both sides, right? The qualitative, experiential side of things. Obviously, we do a lot of blind tastings in the office, and you do extremely well. I mean, that's an interesting thing anyway. Do you think you've improved your blind tasting because of the theory or just from practice? And, you know, for someone at home listening, like how should they balance just going out there and experiencing wine, tasting wine versus, I don't know, paying for an exam and studying books? And what would your tips be around that, would you say?
I think first and foremost, people who enjoy drinking wine and want to drink it should drink it however they like. Right. I don't think there's any need for them to dive into a structured format if they don't want to. But I think that understanding the structure of wine and the theory behind it can really help with tasting and understand what you're tasting and why.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are really good at picking out specific flavors and going, oh, I taste this note in this, and they can identify that. And that's incredibly valuable. And that's, you know, a huge part of the enjoyment of drinking wine.
Yeah.
But I think if you're trying to get really good at tasting, which is quite a fun thing to do, everyone enjoys a blind tasting. I think understanding the structural stuff is really important because you can rule things out quite quickly. I think it's not a fun way of looking at it, but the theory allows you to sort of narrow things down quite quickly and say this wine has to exist in this bracket.
Okay, this might be a hard question to answer, but like if you had to say to someone who wanted to learn and improve, like what would be the 3 things you would say learn about that would give the biggest impact?
I think it's the three main structural components,
right?
Acid, tannin in reds, and alcohol. I think it's by far the most important thing.
But from a sense of just like what does it mean in wine, and then kind of like how you correlate that to like the different grape varietals, and like what they mean in terms of each of those 3 components.
Yeah, so I think there are obviously grape varieties that are more common than others, and I think starting with those is the most important thing. If you have a red wine that is really, really high in tannin, really full-bodied, and you go, wow, this is amazing, it's not a Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Unless something very strange has gone on. Mm-hmm. It's not a Pinot Noir. And I think understanding what those elements are is just absolutely a first step.
Yeah.
In drinking wine.
Having the reference points.
Yeah, having those reference points. And I think that you can go into so much depth after that point and understand the minutiae of this tastes like this tastes like this, and then microscopic elements. But I think understanding the basics is the starting point at least.
Yeah. Do you know what? I feel like one of the tips that I have for people, and it's not necessarily the easiest tip because if you don't have the knowledge, you won't be able to use it. But I always just think like whether it's food or wine, I always think about geography. And I think like understanding the geography of what the place is where the wine comes from can tell you so much without even having like the academic structural framework understanding of like, okay, I know that, you know, Touriga Nacional type wines are going to have, you know, high alcohol content and, you know, lower acidity or whatever. You know, just knowing that what is the climate like in Portugal where this is the indigenous grape, and I think to myself, oh, well, Portugal's where people go on holiday. I know. Do you know what I mean? Just like little kind of nuggets of what is the place in the world where this comes from? What's the climate? What's the altitude?
Climate, altitude, yeah.
Just those 2 or 3
those
things, and like what type of food do they eat? Like, okay, and this is what I'm saying. Like, if you go, well, actually, I look on a map and don't know. You go northern Italy. I don't know what the climate's like there. Then you're going to struggle. But if you have a bit of geographical knowledge, I think it can go a long way with wine because just by his little bits of information, even like what food they eat in that particular area. Like, okay, if I think, what food is northern Spain famous for? like seafood, it's coastal, right? So then you think to yourself, what type of wines are in northern Spain? Albarino, right? I don't know anything about Albarino. Well, just based off that information, I know it's actually the climate's not that hot. I know that actually it rains quite a lot there. So you're thinking like coastal, so it's gonna be like cooler, it's gonna be fresher, it's gonna be what, obviously Albarino is white wine, so and with the kind of the acidity you get from Albarino and the kind of floral aromatics as well, it kind of, in a way, you can kind of piece it all together without actually knowing loads about it.
No, yeah, I mean that's another sort of a deeper rabbit hole, but I think you're completely right. And I think to your point, it's like some of those fundamentals are needed from the theory, but then a lot of that eventually then comes through and comes together in the practice, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is a useful point just to sort of maybe, I mean, you said you're halfway through, right? But have you managed to apply any of the things that you've learned to your job and to your buying through?
Yeah, I think so. I think an underrated aspect of WSET at diploma level is that there's a lot of focus on the business side of it, which isn't there at lower levels, which I think makes sense for people looking for an introduction, but looking at something that they're passionate about and learning more. And I think understanding the different systems by which producers buy grapes or grow grapes, then sell those grapes, is absolutely vital, because as a buyer, you sort of very much have to understand the platforms and the channels via which wines are sold, and that they're not always clear, and there's a lot of opacity and potentially some unexpected and not always obvious paths that people choose to sell things through.
Do you think it's changed the way you appreciate wine?
Yeah, I think it has. And
really?
I think,
like you actually enjoy different wines now than you did previously?
I think so.
Right.
I think so.
Have you got an example?
I think this is probably more of a generalized example, but I think I really enjoyed quite easy drinking, light white wines. I think that's a very common thing for people, is that they really enjoy
like a Pinot Grigio, or not that.
Yeah, not quite.
Not quite that low and
not quite
easy.
That. But I think
it's like having tap water.
I think in a way it does make you, by focusing on appreciating these things, it does make you think that those wines that you might previously have gone, oh, this is really nice and refreshing, you find disappointing or underwhelming.
I think like people that have that kind of like beginner end of the spectrum versus more like intermediate experience, I think the main differential for me is I think people who are at the more beginner end really struggle with high acidity wines.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a thing because it's experience, and I don't know if it's because you have the knowledge and maybe your tastes and preferences or appreciation change, but I think like really like, linear, like acid driven, especially like Burgundy Chardonnays, I think if you give it to someone who's quite new to wine, they'll really struggle with that. I don't know why that characteristic for me is always something that stands out as something that people find harder to appreciate.
We're going to try and sort of break apart a little bit today, isn't it? But I think you're right. I think at the entry level, there's just a very obvious sort of predefined understanding of what a Chardonnay is. And it's typically, I mean, we'll come on to what we're drinking today, but, it's typically a version of a Chardonnay, which isn't actually really the pinnacle of that by any stretch. The same is true of quite a lot of grape varieties that people they'll buy and they'll drink a grape. And actually, when they get surprised by a more, compelling version of that grape, it's a whole different story. So I think, we can obviously come on to some of the challenges around entering the market, how you want to enter it, and what you're familiar with. But I think you're right. I think very quickly you start to realize, I mean, it's a question we've been asked probably a million times over the years, which is, can you really tell the difference between a £10 bottle of wine and a 50 and plus? And it's like, yes, you can. But obviously only if you then start to delve in further.
Absolutely.
Should we move on to our main discussion point?
Yeah, so I mean, interestingly, timing-wise, an article came out in Forbes a week or so ago. Can't remember the exact date. The reason I say that is I do feel like there is a slight resurgence in the wine market, which I think we can get everyone's opinion on during this pod. But effectively, it was kind of like, is the era of alternative asset, appreciation over? And it was really just fixed. Well, it was really kind of looking. It was written by actually the Forbes writer, the journalist. He focuses mainly on whiskey. So he was kind of looking at it from a whiskey market perspective. Clearly, whiskeys have, come down in value a huge amount. Like Macallan, some of the top single malt whiskies have fallen in value by quite a significant amount. And not a too dissimilar situation that we find the wine market in, especially watches, art. So anyway, he wrote this article kind of like going, well, what is the situation in all of these different asset classes and what has been the performance, and kind of speaking to a leading experts in each of these. And in the case of wine, they spoke to someone from LiveX. But just to give you some like headline figures. So the fine wine market, as we know, peaked in sort of October, November 22, and it's been down 27% since that peak, which is, as quoted by LiveX, the deepest downturn the fine wine market has seen in 25 years. And I think that deepest downturn is looked at as kind of both the precipitous drop as well as obviously the length of time. And I think we've all felt that in terms of, it feels like it's been going on a long time. Watches peaked in April 22. So, roughly sort of 6 months before wine, and is down 33%. So it's actually the biggest faller, I think, of all of these asset classes. Watches like Rolex, for example, obviously went up a huge amount in value during the pandemic, and post-pandemic have come down a lot since then, and that came from watch charts. The art index surged in 2021 and then slid to a 25-year low. And we've seen obviously auction sales slump and sort of estimates not being met, and volumes and value reduce in the art market quite significantly from where it was. And as I mentioned, whiskey is in the same category. So I think what was interesting about this was, I think there's a lot of commentary around. It feels like when you go for a downturn, everyone wants a reason for it. And I think this is something we talked about maybe 2 or 3 pods ago, around like everyone talking about, the Gen Z, the younger generation, that's the reason why the wine market's falling. That's the reason why people aren't buying wine. But it didn't really feel like that's telling the true story.
No.
And I think looking at these different asset classes, how they performed, to you guys, I mean, individually, like what would that suggest? I mean, what's it telling you about the fall we've seen in wine prices in the context of what we're seeing in all these other luxury asset classes?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in just because I was just thinking, even just on the spot then, I think what's really quite interesting is, I mean, looking at whiskey, I spent some time recently this week with a chap that works in whiskey, and they've obviously been through kind of almost like a micro version of what we've seen in a longer stretch time of the wine market, right? I mean, big sort of boom territory. Everyone was thinking whiskey was a better alternative almost, and all of the the sort of then issues that can come with that, some of the elements around it being an unregulated market, and the challenges that you then face from that. It doesn't mean that the asset class as it was and as it could be is any different. It just means that you then have to go through those hurdles a little bit. And I think a lot of it is down to some of the stuff that we've been heavy on trying to tackle, which is around truth of information, accuracy of pricing. When the market's going up and everyone's posting these numbers, where are the numbers coming from? Are they actually pegged to accurate trading, which we know not to be the case in some places? And in a down market, it's a lot easier to find all of these things, collect them together, and put people off an alternative space, which otherwise they perhaps may have dabbled in, maybe not. So I think it's that there's, to your point, I think it unearths a lot of the things that you sort of, if you're an educated entrant to the market, you expect to find with an alternative asset class. It's not going to be as easy to track and to rely upon for liquidity. But those are the reasons why you apportion a certain part of your money towards it. I don't know if you agree, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fairly clear that even if we were to agree with the assumption that Gen Z are drinking less,
right,
that I don't see how that would necessarily present itself in the fine wine market in the way that it has over the last 3 years.
No. But it also means that Gen Z were drinking loads in 21 and 22 when the market was skyrocketing, right?
Exactly.
So you can't have it both ways.
No, definitely not. I think it's pretty clear that the macro factors that affected wine, affected whiskey, affected art.
Well, this is the other thing. Wine and whiskey blamed on Gen Z. What are they blaming the watch and the art market on? I don't know. Slightly different, right? But what do you think the underlying truth is?
Yeah, I think it's almost entirely down to those macro factors.
Right, which are
inflation, high interest rates making it more advantageous for people to keep money in the bank rather than invest it in anything else.
Yeah.
And I think crucially the challenges in the Asian market have made a big difference on the luxury market.
Yeah.
I think those two things together are largely the cause of the current downturn.
Yeah, and that was interesting. Like our colleagues in China did an event in Shenzhen. What day are we? Friday, yesterday evening. And, it was interesting because I think, as you said, around the Asian market, I think for the last couple of years, it really struggled to reignite after the pandemic. It was really slow to come out of COVID, really slow to come out of recovery. And I think it's just been a really slow pace. Lots of things have affected, like the whole real estate scandal and issues with a number of like high profile property developers going bust. And then just generally the economy being quite sluggish, and obviously this whole trade war with the US, and then obviously the devaluation of the US dollar. Like, there's been it's like almost like so many different things impacting that Asian market, especially mainland China. But what was interesting is just hearing some of the feedback at an event in the last week where, at an actual dinner, you had people placing an order for 10 cases of Lafite 2019, like at the dinner table, which is like not maybe getting back to what it was, in previous times, especially when, Jonathan and I was working together back in the early days of Cult Wine, sort of 10, 15 years ago when, some of the orders you get out of China were crazy. But it's an indication, again, like that, you're starting to see maybe people come back to the table. You're starting people to place these type of orders that I think for a long time have been almost non-existent.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the Gen Z thing as well, I do think there's just the Gen Z part of the market needs to have a consideration, but I don't really think it's driven by them not drinking. I think it's just more about making sure there is a clear roadmap for that generation to appreciate and learn to appreciate wine and other of these sort of classic, alternatives and classic collectibles in the way that their previous generations have. So I think there's like a really longer term seasonality to wine.
We had that lunch with someone from a concierge company a week or so ago, and he's Gen Z. He looks after a lot of like YouTubers, footballers, obviously just more Gen Z, high net worth individuals. And I suppose what the takeaway from him was kind of like, we still drink, and when we drink, we go really large, but also at the same time, we're not drinking casually. But then I was thinking to myself, like, I don't know if that's also like an early 20s thing to do anyway. That kind of, like when he was saying that, I was like, well, that kind of resonates with what we were doing at the same age. Mm-hmm. But then I think his takeaway for us was kind of, how do you make wine relatable to people in that age group now who do have a lot of money? And I think his perspective was more kind of, and not necessarily in a good or a bad way, but more kind of, how would you describe it? It was more kind of,
well, I think it's just about that
how
process.
Can you articulate what would be a flex on social media, which sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but it was more kind of like, these people just need to know, like, okay, if I'm a footballer and I've got a wine cellar in my house, how do I know what are the cool labels to have on display? And well, like an example he gave was like
of everything, right? And it's like, I just think in all these markets, and it becomes more evident when you then look at it in parallel with watches and art, for instance. I think it's a case where ultimately, these markets can't just keep going up and rocketing in a linear fashion, right? So they do have to have those points in time where they come off. And when they come off, it's largely because these people have made great returns in a market that they've done very well with long term. And then they either that's them done, or they then will just wait for the market to bounce and rebuy, right? Having sold out at a good time. So I think there's a longer term seasonality than maybe we first appreciated when people have seen such good return.
Shawnee, right. Question is, where's the market heading?
I think we're looking at a period of more stability going forward.
Okay.
I am not going to be someone who says we're going to have a V-shaped recovery immediately. But I think the second half... Sorry, not a popular statement.
How large does the V have to be? It's got to have a little bounce.
I think we have seen some evidence that there's been a bounce in some wines. I think there has been some evidence.
Tell us more.
I think...
What's bounced? What's
Sassicaia is a good example.
What is bouncing?
What is bouncing? I think the Super Tuscan category as a whole has actually done quite well in the last 6 months.
I agree.
I've
seen it's getting bid up for sure.
I
don't think it's done one in a year, but in the last month it's getting bid up for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we might see is pockets of price increases before we start seeing the market as a whole move.
Right.
Which would be certainly an encouraging sign anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if we're expecting the whole market to be up 5% by the end of the year, that would be an unlikely outcome.
What else is bouncing? Because I feel like you're quite in tune with what's happening.
I think white Burgundy has been appreciating for a little while now.
Yeah.
It did take a downturn, like the rest of the market did, but has stabilized. And I think we've seen evidence over the last year, even year and a half, that prices have been, for some labels, have been appreciating.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at it a little bit in a previous pod, but it'd be good to get your I guess, your perspective from your side of the market as to what you've seen in particular in white Burgundy. And like, because we discussed, what were the reasons, what were the protecting factors almost to that part of the market, which is quite unique, obviously. Wondered if you saw any further snippets that might be interesting.
I think really the appeal of white Burgundy is twofold, and these may be very obvious factors, but one is that people are drinking slightly more white wine. There's evidence that there are more trades of white wine as well. So that drinking of white wine by the general public is also being reflected by fine wines and collectors. And the supply of white Burgundy from the top vineyards is very, very low. Yeah. The overall production of white wines in Burgundy is actually higher than red wines, which most people might not expect. But for these highly collectible, sought after, very minute labels, the parcels are pretty small. The volumes are pretty small.
Yeah.
And I think as soon as you have a category that's growing in demand, even relative to the rest of Burgundy, which is, as we know, the demand has been crazy over the last decade or so, you're always going to get price appreciations.
And talking about white Burgundy, how do you think our wine of the day compares?
I think there's definitely stylistic similarities.
What are we drinking? Have we told the audience yet?
We've not. No, you can, as you've already started, please reveal, Sean.
Thank you. We are drinking 2015 Penfolds Yattarna Chardonnay.
Yeah.
Which is a wine that I've tried before at a couple of trade tastings for new releases. And always stands out because it really does have that sort of very tight structure and the acidity that really carries it. To the extent that, I mean, this is a...
There you go, mate. As you're doing the homework.
To the extent that, I mean, this 2015 has just got so much freshness.
Yeah. Do you know what? Every time I've had this, similar to you, either like, when they do the kind of new releases, the thing it always, stays in my mind is kind of, it's so polished. It's like such a well-made wine. It's just really high quality, like in terms of, and I think it kind of represents that whole kind of Penfolds approach of kind of only taking the best grapes from their vineyards each year, and they're kind of, they don't really mind what that is. They'll just make the best wine possible. And I feel you get that in the winemaking, the use of the oaks, obviously high quality, the élevage is done really well. And so it just ends up just getting something that you're just like, you can't drink that and not think that is a brilliantly, really well, precisely made glass of Chardonnay. Well, is it going to get me emotional in the same way a Coche d'Ory or, an Arnaud Ons or, one of these top white Burgundy producers? I think is maybe lacking that for me. Maybe you don't expect at that price point, but...
Yeah, but it's that whole reliability factor, isn't it? It's like, you can understand, I mean, we've been so close with the brand for a long time as far as the business goes, right? I mean, it's, the Treasury are not far down the road still, and having been to so many of their tastings and hosted a lot of events, I think one thing that stood out over time, which I think was probably fair, is that we tasted a lot of that stuff at these various evenings, quite young. And I think a lot of their wines are just, as you said, in their own pockets, very consistent. Just some of these vintages and older are just now starting to kind of be actually where they should be.
Yeah.
And you can understand why a lot of this, like,
I mean,
brand
that's actually,
carries.
it's funny to think about that. That's a 10-year-old Chardonnay.
Yeah.
Just because actually, like, it tastes so fresh in the glass so fresh, as well, right?
No, absolutely. And I think if anyone has actually tried these young, they are bracing.
Yeah.
I think the acidity is aggressive.
Well put. Yeah.
Aggressive.
Which kind of comes back to that point earlier. I mean, it's interesting we started on Penfolds because our next discussion point, looking at like what's happened in the market over the last month since we did the last podcast is, we're in September. We've got the September releases. Sean, as you are on the buying side and, you are a guest today, do you want to just tell the audience a little bit about what the September releases are as part of the wine calendar, I suppose?
So September releases, I think, go back to the late 90s and early 2000s. I think Almaviva was the first wine to be released via La Place over September.
Leave the history lessons to me, mate.
Sorry.
Yeah, it probably was. Yeah.
And I think they've since expanded to become a pretty important part of the calendar.
Yeah.
These are La Place de Bordeaux, which are the negociants who act as importers, bringing wines from outside of Bordeaux and offering them via La Place in September.
Yeah.
It's it's a little less chaotic than EP campaigns, I'd say. Thankfully, because these producers are largely spread out across the world, they've got their own interests. They're not usually trying to one-up their neighbors or release on the same day or the day after or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it's a little more
reliable, like an orderly queue.
Yeah, it's calm.
Yeah, at least they give it a month as well, rather. On-premise sort of like could be whenever. September.
It's part of the fun.
Yeah, well, it is. But.
Absolutely. So these are wines from all around the world. Increasingly, there've been more wines from France as well, and you do get the occasional Bordeaux white wine thrown in. But really, we're looking at some of the world's iconic wines of all shapes and sizes.
Right. So, I mean, what's the takeaways for this campaign? Has it been successful? What has worked? What hasn't worked? Has there been like a change in the kind of types of wines that have been popular or not? What's the scoop?
So, in terms of success, I think I'd say it's not been entirely homogenous, which is no surprise. These are wines from all around the world with producers at different price points, different styles, different interests. But I think all in all, the price drops that we've seen in the market over the last 2 years have meant that a lot of the current release prices are no longer competitive. I think
when you say that, but I mean, like they chose the release prices
themselves. They did, absolutely.
In the context of what's happened over the last 2 years. So
I feel like,
what do you think happened in those boardrooms when they were choosing the prices?
Sorry,
just to be a bit more controversial, adding in the Place de Bordeaux to their distribution, which also takes margin, is that helpful in pricing wines for the market?
I think you have seen an increasing number of producers trying to distribute via Laplace. And I think one advantage of Laplace is that it is the largest distribution network in the world.
Agreed. Yeah, makes sense. If you're a brand, you want to get out there, you want to distribute into international markets. They've got the infrastructure, they've got the longevity, they've got everything you need to get it out there.
And whilst I think you can say potentially that you're adding an extra step to the process and potentially their margin is making prices uncompetitive, I think that is something you could say. But I think for producers, the range of distribution and the ability to build clients, drinkers, collectors who are interested in these wines around the world does have value. However,
here we go.
Those producers who have dropped prices for these 2025 releases have such as Almaviva, which I think actually deserves a mention as one of the producers that dropped their wine enough that it just about works.
So I'm just looking at the numbers here. 115 euros was last year. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then 75 euros this year.
Yeah, which is a pretty significant drop. I think we could all say that, in terms of value.
What was the price of other back vintages on the market? That's because obviously that's the key thing that we and consumers look at, right?
So this is the problem. You go back 2-3 years and you have Almaviva 19, 18 that look better if comparable value to the latest release, and I think that's just always going to be a challenging issue.
I actually really like Almaviva. I think it's a brilliant wine, really well made, and actually pretty good value in the grand scale. Obviously, we're going to come on to our listeners' questions, and we had a bit of criticism around what we think is good value, but in the grand schemes of what we do in the fine wine market, I think to get a wine like Almaviva with its heritage and its quality at that sort of price point for a back vintage, it's got 5, 6, 7, 8 years of cellaring age, and that cost that you're going to pay for cellaring is kind of gone. Because that's the other thing. I think you pay 75 euros today and you've got to cellar it yourself for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years. That's adding another 70, 80, 90 pounds to the cost by the time it gets to the same age. Like, you've got to factor these things in, have you not?
You do, but I mean, sorry to jump in, but I just think...
Yeah, no, jump in away.
Well, I think it's like there's a lot of aspects to it which have just been very difficult, very, very hard to manage. I think the falling wider market, what was largely or less successful Bordeaux campaign in the summer. A lot of the estates there that we discussed managed to get pricing on around okay, but largely it was a challenging year to take up in terms of new release because so much back vintage looks such good value, with age and ultimately, almost or arguably better in quality. So I think the big challenge and almost the victim of own success type story with the Almavivas of this world is that they probably spent a year realizing it was a decent vintage, probably not necessarily on the day of release thinking of the prices built into the context of making that wine throughout the year. As we discussed before, overheads are rising with all these various different aspects of tariffs and beyond. I mean, it's not an easy place to be the kind of the new, or shouldn't say the new, but the cheaper or better value end of the market, because ultimately everything's getting more expensive.
The interesting thing was obviously, Latour did another back vintage release. What was it?
2012?
2012. And I saw a very stinging assessment of that and the price because it was above the market. Now, one of the kind of interpretations was that this ex-Chateau premium wasn't worth anything, and as soon as it becomes a secondary market wine, effectively it just evaporates. But I was actually thinking to myself, like, in my 15 years in this market, having been very fortunate to attended a lot of wineries, when you drink back vintages at the winery, and this, in my mind, one of the most memorable was Henri Gouge that we had at the winery in Burgundy, but also in Bordeaux many times, tasting back vintages that have come directly from the cellar. Like, there is absolutely zero doubt in my mind, from a qualitative perspective, that the wines that have stayed at the chateau taste better.
Well, that's just
that's
a non-negotiable.
I think that is you cannot argue against that, in my opinion. Do you agree? Disagree?
No, I agree completely. I mean, the 2024 Entrepreneur Week, Haute Bailly was a particular standout, in part because they brought out some very old vintages from their cellar.
Yeah.
I mean, in the context of an Entrepreneur release where you're tasting the latest vintage, they brought out vintages from the 80s, 70s. It was really exceptional, and they were in unbelievable condition.
Yeah.
Some large formats, so you can understand they'd age a little slower.
Yeah.
But the freshness and the quality of them was incredible.
And look, I think, obviously, we talk a lot about the market from an investment perspective, but if you're a collector and you like Chateau Latour, a 25% premium on in-market stock that I can guarantee has inconsistencies over where it's been stored, how it's been stored, where it's traveled, which countries it's been through. Not to say they're bad, if they're in bond and their original wooden case is still going to be very, very good. But I actually genuinely think that a 20 to 25% premium to have a bottle that's come directly from the cellar, I think I genuinely think it translates into quality on the dinner table. I genuinely do.
I completely agree.
And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it'd be an interesting test. Actually, that'd be a really interesting test. Do a dinner where you go, right, we'll get one ex-Chateau 2012 straight from the cellar, and we'll compare it to an in-market, do them blind, serve them side by side to like a knowing audience, and just say, what do you think they're the same? Like, just what do you think of those wines? And I actually think genuinely people will think the ex-cellar one is fresher, maybe a bit more,
100%.
Like a bit more energy
especially
about
for
it.
Like, largely for the back vintages, it's like, look at the premium people willing to pay for the Bill Coke cellar, right? And I know there's other aspects, but largely that was because of his passion for proving provenance, right? Making sure it was a robust course of supply. And it's the same thing, right? It's the same thing as, I mean, there's a bit more of a story element, but when you go to these estates and you taste them, they do taste better because you're in situ. But if the wine's in situ and it hasn't moved, it's a living organism essentially. It's undoubtedly going to be better than one that's travelled, who knows where around the world.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, like, look, from a pure investment hat on, like, and Sean, I'd be interested what you think. I don't think I would advise someone from a pure investment perspective to buy the Latour 2012 ex-Chateau release. Take that hat off, put my hat on for a wine enthusiast, lover, collector, drinker who wants to drink the best. I would wholeheartedly suggest that paying that extra 20%, 25% is worth it.
Well, I speak to so many people.
I genuinely do. I don't know what you think.
No, I agree. I think if you're looking at wine as an investment, I would strongly advise not to buy ex-Chateau stock that's more expensive than existing releases, because I think there's definitely
large formats.
Maybe a little different.
To throw a spanner in the works.
Maybe a little different. I think there's definitely a window where they make a difference. We've had definitely occasions over the recent years with trade partners asking for these wines, and they have specifically asked for ex-Chateau stock.
Have they?
They have. It has
really?
Happened. They've asked for proof tags specifically on Latour stock.
Right. Because they want the later release.
Because they want the later release.
Well, exactly. When they place an order through Jacqueline.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. That's new news to me. So tell us more about that. That is actually genuinely. I'm actually genuinely interested by that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had trade clients who are willing to pay more for ex-Chateau stock with proof tags, but crucially
for some of these back vintage
releases, exactly. And this is even a couple of years after the original release.
Because I'm trying to think how many we've had so far. Because the ones that are important are the ones with dual releases. right? Because it's the ones where it's like the 2012 that's been released twice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And 12 was the first vintage they did release, right? They exited in 13. Was it around then?
Exited in 13. 13 was the first one.
12 was
12 was the last one. That was the last one to get released on Premier.
Yeah. That was it.
But I think the one caveat I'd make to that is they weren't paying, the trade client wasn't interested in paying what is above market prices.
Right.
So if you're saying you're going to get into this wine 10% above market wine, even 20% as a premium for the ex-Chateau
But surely,
stock.
I mean, do you think there's a potential in the future where it becomes almost like P2?
Yeah. Definitely.
Or like champagne, champagne late release.
I think whether or not the market will give it time is a different matter, but I think everything that we're doing as a company, everything that the market is crying out for is a lot more homogeneity with pricing and all of these aspects, which are going to make things more transparent, right? And I think actually over time, people will continue to get perhaps stung and caught out by buying cheaper versions of wines that are available in offhanded auctions, and provenance is not paramount, and actually eventually round circle it will be like, well, actually there is a real premium for these wines that have sat in the cellar. It's like that's,
and also I think like if you think about like 20, 30 years ago, you know, they produce the wine, they sell 70, 80, 90% of the stock at En Primeur, it all goes into circulation. We know over the last 10, 15 years, every year En Primeur holding back more stock. So inevitably that's going to result in more, you know, subsequent releases by the estates, because like even the ones that aren't high profile, like places like Chateau Margaux, we know have been reducing every year. So they've got loads of stock that's going to have to eventually be released back onto the market. And you think about, let's say, what Champagne, right? You know, Champagne a few years ago, they didn't even have the disgorgement dates on the bottles. And that's a massive trend now, which is like, okay, you need to put the disgorgement gates on, because obviously that's the most important factor when it comes to like a vintage champagne, like when it was actually disgorged. So that's a good example of like a different market that had that kind of almost like naturally as part of the, you know, that's naturally part of the process of releasing the wines. So it's just a really interesting thing, because it's kind of thinking about it going like, as long as there's a really traceable, obvious way to kind of say like, could you ever imagine a situation where you kind of like have Latour 2012 V1, V2, V3, V4, and they all trade at slightly different prices? Can you imagine that happening?
I think from a buying perspective, when we've been looking at champagnes that have different disgorgement dates, which I think is a logical comparison, they tend to, after a period of time, homogenize in price. And I think the same would probably happen for these wines. I think there may well be a premium. There may be a small discrepancy in price between P1, as you say, or whatever it is, and P3, P2. But I think that would probably narrow over time.
Let me ask you another question. When William Kelly or Neil Martin or Antonio Galloni or any of the top critics, Jancis, taste the wine, if they refer to their tasting note as V1 or V2 or V3, do you think that starts to change things?
It's a good question. I think that might make more of a difference. I think that might make more of a difference in how we talk about it, and I think that's very important with these things, because at the end of the day, I think currently we view Latour as Latour. Whether it released today or 10 years ago, I think the current way we think about it is very much that they're the same wine.
Yeah, I was gonna, and we're talking about Latour, which is obviously going back to the value element. You know, it's at the very top of the scale. It's one of the few wines. Well, we'll come on to maybe a bit more detail elsewhere, but you know, it's no longer in the En Primeur system. It's very expensive. It's going to take time for it to really show as to whether this whole new strategy of theirs is going to pay dividend. But you know, ultimately, your point is correct, which is like, you know, the market generally starts with the critics, right? And those are the people that people follow depending on what their preference is. And if they were to start kind of going through that element to different versions of it, then maybe.
I just wonder, like, is there like a parallel to like the kind of cultural shift we're seeing when it comes to luxury or even like food, right? Where, you know, we're seeing people willing, especially who've got enough income, they're willing to pay more, where they get the absolute traceability and provenance of like where those eggs come from, or where this fruit comes from, or where these, you know, and when they were reared and like how long they've been aged, but kind of getting that very like high specificity around that, and people's willingness to pay is clearly there. And I suppose with wine, I think it's always one of those things. It's always going to be like a bit of tension between producer and consumer, and I think producers will always want to capitalize on an opportunity. So if they see that there's clearly an opportunity whereby, there is a premium they can charge, almost kind of like the P2 situation, right? Because you think about P2 was created because of Onatec, right? And Onatec, which was kind of the original P2, and the rebranding happened, which is obviously the late disgorgement. Was that a move to, like, it already existed, but they kind of wanted to make it a clearer definition within the market, because they realized that there was clearly a way for them to generate more revenue and more income for those bottles that had been disgorged later. And maybe it wasn't clear enough. So I think that was a good example of like the wine industry reacting to what they were seeing in the market and trying to almost forge and create that path in a more clearer sense.
Well, we've seen loads of examples of that, haven't we? Like there's second wines of Bordeaux in particular. A lot of them have now set up, their own shy, and it's very much, they don't want to discuss it as a second wine. It's its own wine. The same is true of a Chem, let's say, which doesn't want to be labeled a dessert wine. It's a sweet wine, and it has different times at which you can enjoy it. I think it's just an ever-changing landscape, isn't it? And I think it's difficult to put a finger on where it's heading. But I think, in my mind, I think there's definitely a world, given all of these different aspects we've talked about around storing wines, provenance, like, why wouldn't there be a world where a lot of these estates have, handsome and huge cellars, like that you, as a slight premium, can pay for some of your purchase, that vintage, to remain on site until you want it delivered and consumed, right?
Yeah.
Where better to have it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a couple of other topics we want to move on to. So maybe as the kind of last say on this particular area, the September releases. Like Sean, is there any sort of takeaways from the September releases you would give?
I think something that's noteworthy is the range of wines being offered.
Yeah.
Definitely over the last 2-3 years, but since September releases began, really, we're seeing a broader range of styles and locations of wines that are being offered. I think a big standout this year for me was the increase in white wines. There's an approximately 65% increase in the number of white wines being offered.
And where are these white wines coming from? Like South America or?
Yeah, so I think one of the big impacts this year was the introduction of 3 Loire producers.
Right, interesting.
From different areas of the Loire, all making dry wines. So I think that very much tracks with what we were saying earlier about increased consumption of whites.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say La Place are getting ahead of the curve, because I think this trend of white wine's been going for a while.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting to see the market adapting and moving more towards consumer preferences with this.
Yeah.
And some of these are getting some pretty interesting critical feedback. Zuccardi also have a white wine coming out, El Camino de las Flores.
Right.
It's quite interesting. It's in classic Zuccardi fashion, is a single vineyard wine high in the Uco Valley. Chardonnay.
Yeah.
They block malolactic fermentation, and no oak at all in this one.
Okay.
So definitely
Have you tried
interesting.
it?
I have not.
No.
I have not.
What was it critical? How was it received?
Yeah, pretty promising. I mean, first vintage, so obviously.
What do you think the price point for that, something like that, would be?
I think that we're expecting around £40 a bottle.
Okay.
Which is pretty approachable, pretty accessible.
Yeah, for something of that craft and quality
absolutely.
level.
And it's something apparently they've been working on for a few years now, and getting it just right took a little while, which I think is understandable given the lack of mallow and the lack of oak. It's a slightly unique style.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great wrap up of the September releases. So one of the biggest things that's happened in the last month or so since the last pod is the announcement from Chateau Lafleur. For those who don't know, that's a very high profile wine in Pomerol, on the right bank in Bordeaux. Vintages can range from £400 or £500 a bottle all the way up to over £1,000 for some of the back vintages and some of the famed years from this particular estate. Anyway, they announced that they're leaving the Bordeaux AOC, Pomerol AOC and Bordeaux AOC, which we can kind of explain a little bit more. And they kind of cited reasons that, they wanted a bit more flexibility. They want to be restricted as much by the kind of rules that go with Pomerol AOC as well as the Bordeaux AOC. There's been a lot about this in the press, a lot of people's opinions. Lafleur haven't made any efforts to try and provide any clarity as to the exact ruling that they were unhappy about. Whether that was on purpose or not, I'm not sure. What's the initial reaction? I mean, Sean, from your perspective as a wine buyer, it's something that probably piques your interest in terms of seeing this change. But what was your initial reaction to this?
I think my initial reaction was not wholly surprised. I think for brands like this, like Lafleur, that can certainly stand on their own they're not relying on Pomerol AOC as a marketing tool at all. I think Lafleur is one of the most collectible and sought after names in wine.
For people that don't know at home what that means to have Pomerol AOC or Bordeaux AOC, just very succinctly and as easily as possible, maybe explain what it means.
Yeah, so having an appellation name like Pomerol or Bordeaux on your bottle means, firstly, it's a geographical indicator that your wine's produced in this area.
Yeah.
Lafleur has not moved from Bordeaux. It is still in the Bordeaux area. But it also means sticking to requirements around winemaking, grape growing, etc. There's a variety of things. It can be restrictions on irrigation, which I think is particularly relevant for Lafleur.
Which is completely restricted. Unless it's under the age of 2, I believe.
Yeah, or age. I believe in emergency situations you can apply, but that doesn't happen very often.
Which in layman terms means that in Bordeaux, as a winemaker, you can't use water
to
irrigate the land.
Absolutely. And this might actually be Lafleur's main objection, because one of the things that they did put out in their statement is that they have started using rainwater that they've collected on the property.
Right, I didn't see that. Right.
Which points pretty clearly that they felt that a number of recent vintages, as a result of climate change, have been significantly warmer and drier than they would want for ideal grape growing. 22, 16, 19 are very clear examples of this.
And it would have been helpful to have some H2O.
Absolutely. And there's significant value in being able to time the application of H2O as well, which is what I think they're pushing towards.
And anything else, do you think? Any other reasons? Obviously, there's a restriction around yields. I don't think it's that, because obviously they're making high quality wine.
Yeah.
There's a restriction around grape varietal. But is that relevant here?
But I think that they're classically a very low production wine for Bordeaux, right?
Yeah.
Between 5,000-6,000 cases or so?
Don't know exactly. Yeah,
but I think it's in that sweet spot, like
maybe less,
between 5 and 10, right? Rather than being
less.
I think it maybe less, right? And it would be more of a shock to the system if it had been like a 15 to 20,000 case.
They're known for using a lot of Cabernet Franc versus Merlot, and obviously with climate change coming, they might want to test out different grape varietals. I'm not sure. Gives them a bit more flexibility to do that.
I just think because they're not a mass production name of Bordeaux in that sense, and not, we've been fortunate to taste it, and it's a great wine, great label, all of the above. But I think they probably got to that point where they felt maybe like Latour, where they were like, well, we've superseded the ramifications of this whole process. We don't need to. I don't know. I mean, I'm not putting words in their mouth, but
I've got a funny story about Lafleur actually.
Go on.
Do you remember there used to be a Michelin star restaurant in Chiswick called Hedone? Mm-hmm. Do you remember that? It had like a Scandinavian proprietor chef. Can't remember his exact name. Anyway, we went there once with clients. We took a couple of bottles of wine, but one was a Lafleur 88 bottle, and we brought it in. And he came over and said, "Are you drinking these here?" We're like, "Yeah, we're going to drink these here." And he kind of scoffed our selection. He said, "Oh, Lafleur, it's a pizza wine."
Wow.
So in my mind, I only ever think of Lafleur as being a pizza wine.
I'm thinking he must eat really good pizza. Need to go around to his. He must have a great pizza oven.
Yeah. He's a bit eccentric, to be fair.
But I just think it's so interesting to see these little things that are happening, and they're not big. They're not little things in the context of the market, right? And like Bordeaux's been through a challenging period, which we've covered at length in previous pods. But I think there's no right or wrong way anymore. I think a lot of these, not just in wine, but I think in a lot of aspects to the world right now, there's a lot of things being broken down. So
I think back in the day, having Bordeaux, having Pomerol on the label was a main marketing tool for wineries. I think we live in an age, in a digital age, and a social media age, and does that really make a difference for Lafleur? Of course it doesn't. Like, at the end of the day, there's so many other examples of great wines that are worth a lot of money, that are highly sought after, that don't conform to the the kind of regional controls that are in place. It is quite a shock to see someone of the established kind of Bordeaux
it's almost like it
pyramid
kind of
leave.
Just simply to like a shock marketing tactic. It's
but
they're going to be the most spoken about wine in the next month for a while in most outlets, in a market where the market's been tough. they're a wine that isn't produced.
But also,
in
the
mass
thing
volume.
is
It's
that there's such trust in that brand that they think that the owners and the winemakers there know what they're doing. That we trust they're going to make the best wine possible. The fans of Lafleur that buy it every year on allocation are going to think to themselves, well, actually, great. Like they've got even more flexibility to make an even better wine. That's basically what they're going to be thinking. So from an impact perspective, as you said, it's probably been a net positive, and over the long run, won't make any difference at all. And if climate change becomes more increasingly difficult in Bordeaux, they might have got ahead of the curve in a way that Latour got ahead of the curve and leaving kind of en primeur. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point about getting ahead of the curve, because setting up irrigation systems is not as easy as sending someone out there with a bucket water and digging a trench. Like, it's going to take some time. It's going to take them some practice to work out how to do this, because there are many great wines produced with irrigation systems, but it's not something they've done before.
Yeah.
So I think adapting it early, maybe before the rest of Bordeaux has to anyway.
Yeah.
Is just a really, really strong idea.
Yeah. Great.
So in summary, would you say it's a Lafleur par or Lafleur enough?
Not sure that justifies an answer.
Lafleur enough.
Lafleur enough for me.
Right, here we go. Putting you to the test. This is my favourite part of today's pod. Looking forward to this. Right, so we have set a challenge. We've set a challenge to co-host Jonathan Stevenson, as well as Shawnee. Right. Shawnee, right. Can he get it right, though? We'll see. We have asked everyone, including myself, to pick one wine, an investment pick, under £100. So you got a budget of £100
per bottle
for an investment pick. So what is your choice in that selection? Then under £500, and then an unlimited budget. What would you go for? So shall we go to the guest first, or should we go to the co-host? I don't know who wants to go first. Do either of you have a preference?
The guest.
Right, guest first. Under £100, what do you want to go for?
I think it's not a particularly good sign when you have to preface something you've written down with an explanation. But I think
explanations are welcome. These will be critiqued.
I think this is a wine which is unique enough and with significant quality that is certainly undervalued versus other wines of the same grape variety, but also other wines from this region.
Spit it out.
I have gone...
What a diatribe we had to live through before we got this selection.
Sylvain Pattay Aligoté Clos du Roi 2020. And the large reason for pick...
So left field. Like, I can't believe you've gone for
that.
And Aligoté, right, so you've gone Aligoté. Your belief here is that white... Right, you've been championing whites all pod. This makes sense now.
Mm-hmm.
You've been trying to prime the audience.
Us up. I've been leading up to this moment.
Aligoté over Chardonnay. Do you actually like Aligoté? It seems to be catching a wave, right?
Yeah, I think it's catching a wave, and I think Sylvain Pattay is a pretty big reason why.
Aligoté.
And if Aligoté does establish itself, as I think it probably should, as really a high quality grape.
Right. How much is it worth?
It's currently about £40 a bottle.
That is expensive for Aligoté, though.
This is a single vineyard, which we know is very popular at the moment.
What vintage was it?
2020.
Right.
Largely because it's the highest scored and is cheaper than most of the others.
What was the score?
It's Bourgogne Aligoté. We're talking about 93 points or so.
Right. I mean, this is important information. Really, the highest scored and the cheapest vintage for this particular cuvee.
That's got any availability on the market, which is another good sign.
And are there any older vintages available?
It seems like this is consumed pretty quickly, so no.
Okay, fine. All right. Jonathan, under £100, what are you going for?
I've decided to take it back to something that we had the fortune of drinking probably far more than we should have done at a much cheaper price back in the day.
Here we go.
Maison Loire Bourgogne, 2015.
Okay. What price point are we talking about?
Roughly £90 per bottle.
Yeah.
Currently.
We're worried about.
Yeah, we had.
So it's already done pretty well. So like 400% already.
It has, but I just think we're obviously now approaching that point in time where Loire is going to have even more attention than it had done in the previous run-up. As we now know, Sean's clarified the market is about to bounce back in a vicious, Euben fashion. So
Euben, it's going back.
Yeah, I think I just think it. Well, as far as a brand, a wine, the Bourgogne level entry, £90 a bottle.
There you go.
I think that would double in price.
Okay, I chose mine and I kind of regretted it afterwards, but I've gone from Il Poglione, Brunello Montalcino 2016. Sean knew that was coming. Look, okay, if this doesn't turn out to be a good investment wine, it has to be the best value wine in the world.
Strong statement.
This is when you agree. And you go, yeah, you're right. No, right. Let me explain why. So, £25 per bottle, right? £150 per case of 6. These are the scores it's got. 97 points from Vinous Media, 95 points from The Wine Advocate, 96 points from Jeb Dunnock, 95 points from Decanter. That's incredible for a £25 bottle of wine. The 2016 vintage in Brunello Montalcino is famously known for being one of the greatest ever vintages for Brunello Montalcino for the Tuscany region. Rated at 98 points just for the vintage on itself. It trades a lot. It's traded 45 times this year. And I just wanted to give you a little quote. So the most recent tasting on Vinous Media, the wine critic, I can't remember which one it was, but anyway, November 23 was the most recent tasting by a professional critic. He said, "This is, without doubt, one of the vintage's top wines. 2016 for this wine is total class." And I just think, like, if you're paying £25 for that, like, you know, that's a bet worth making. And like, could it be 50 quid in a few years' time? I think it could be 50 quid in a few years' time. And that's 100% return. So that's my pick. Right. Round 2, under £500. Shawnee, right. What are we going for?
Also in Brunello.
There we go.
Biondi Santi 2010.
Just crept into the price bracket.
Just crept into the price bracket.
What a fantastic wine.
Outstanding. One of the great vintages for Brunello.
What price are we at, actually?
Barely over £1,000 per 6.
Okay.
So in the category.
Yeah. So what is the reserve then?
No.
Really? Okay. Fine. Go on.
But given, you know, this is going to be a legendary vintage.
Yeah.
Absolutely outstanding quality, very highly scored, and just it's a simple one. This is a producer everyone really likes.
Yeah.
It's hugely popular, and it's just cheaper than many of the surrounding vintages, which it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, look, you'll know that I love that particular pick. I actually wrote an analysis on that a few years ago, so I concur. I think it looks absolutely superb value. Great choice.
Great wine, great label, great vintage. I'll keep mine short and sweet. I went for Arnaud Le Show, Romani Le Show 2009. Largely because it scores incredibly highly on the Cult Wines fair value rating. But also, I mean, the success of that, much like Loire, has been well championed in the last few years, but it's come off massively in price, and at £350 per bottle. Okay, it's not a table wine and not a pizza wine, but it's a wine I think should easily recover.
You can have pizza with it.
You can do, as long as it's...
You can have what you want with it.
Well, exactly. But I do think that if you buy it at that price, it's gonna do incredibly well.
Do you know what? I love my selections.
Get on with them then. We haven't got long left.
Wait. Under £500. So I've gone for Clos Lombray 2016. So here's the context. 1, it was acquired by LVMH. LVMH in the last 4 vintages have massively increased the price. The 2016 vintage, as we know, is an amazing vintage for Burgundy. Clos Lombray 2016 is one of the cheapest vintage, if not the cheapest vintage you can buy of this Grand Cru. It's £2,000 for a 12, so £165 per bottle. So let's put this in context. I would compare, for me, the 16 in terms of quality of vintage, the 02, the 2005, 2010, 09. All of those trade at over £3,000 for a 12, and this is 2K. So that's already a 50% discount to the other comparable vintages. If you look at the most recent vintages, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, since LVMH took over, those wines have all been pushed in price significantly. And look, if anyone knows anything about LVMH, they like to push a luxury asset, and this is what they're going to be doing with this brand. All of those vintages, those last 4 years, which comparatively quality-wise, maybe at the same sort of level, but more recent, they trade between £3.6 to £5,000 per 12, or £300 to up to £500 per bottle. So buying this at £165 for me has to be one of the biggest bargains that exists today in the wine market. And not only that, Jancis Robinson recently tasted this in 2024, and she scored it 18 out of 20, which for Jancis is very high score because she doesn't like giving scores above 18. So I took that as a very, very positive sense. And on Cellar Tracker, it's got a 93.6 average, which again is very, very strong. Most recent scores on Cellar Tracker around 95. Actually, by reading this, I was thinking to myself, I shouldn't tell everyone on the pod because I don't want everyone to buy it, and I keep it to myself. But
you have done
in the
now,
sense
so
of the
thank
game,
you.
in the sense of the game, it's an absolute stone cold winner.
And in the interest of making sure we finish in time,
right, go on.
Shall I quickly do the third one?
Yeah, unlimited budget.
Unlimited budget. I'm going to go for Valbuena number 5, 2014. The second wine of Vega Sicilia.
Sounds like Mambo number 5.
It's just a fantastic wine, great value. Yeah. And obviously budget, no object on this one, but I just felt it was...
how much is it per bottle? That's
really not expensive.
It could have gone in the second category.
Well, it could have gone in almost either. the previous two, but I just felt like it's a wine that just
Which
needs
vintage
to get
of
more
Valbuena?
acclaim. 2014.
Right. And
Highest,
it's closing the gap
over
on Unico.
97 points on the fair value. It's closing the gap on Unico. Unico continues to be an ever-present name in the top collectors' conversations of one of their favorite wines.
Smart.
And yeah, I enjoyed my favorite bottle of Valbuena number 5 overlooking Valderrama on the Costa del Golf. So yeah, special place in my heart.
1,
2009
2,
vintage.
3, 4, 5.
Over to you, Sean.
Thank you. I have gone for Krug Clos de Menil 1998. Reason for this one.
Off vintage.
Reason for this one is basically availability and price. There's no older vintage of Krug Clos de Menil that isn't trading at more than £1,850 per bottle. This is at 1,400.
Wait. So all older vintages are 1,850 or more.
Yep, and this one is trading at 1,400
because it's got something wrong with it.
Because it hasn't had time to get there yet.
I feel like this is a competition.
2 years ago, there were 44 offers on the market for this wine. Today, there are 16. This is clearly being drunk up. People are consuming it. And as we know with champagne...
Those 44 sellers have finally got rid of the stock.
They've finally got rid of it. It's quite well scored, to be fair. It's quite well scored. I think it's 96 points.
Okay.
96 is 99, but most of the other older vintage...
normalised score? Yeah, I was going to say.
That's true.
Over to Tom then, because we all know that is the main reason we're here is to hear Tom's third and final pick.
So
any budget, Tom? I've
got two.
Oh, okay.
I've got two.
We're against the clock here, but yeah.
Well, so I mean, any budget has to be Burgundy, obviously. It has to be the 2019 vintage, because I think the 2019 vintage is going to be the greatest vintage of Burgundy of all time. It's going to eclipse 71, 78, 85, 1993, 99, 2002, 05, 10. Yes, 16. It's going to eclipse all of those. It's potentially going to be the best ever. So it has to be from this vintage. And I was just looking at all the most premium wines from this vintage with the best scores and looking at how they benchmark. And the one that stood out the most was La Tâche 2019. 100-point wine, 99 plus point wine. Obviously a mythical wine in terms of La Tâche. You can get it for about $4,500 per bottle. 98.7 average score on Cellar Tracker. It's absolutely insane. Such a high score on Cellar Tracker. To put it into context, the 99 trades at £6,000-7,000 a bottle, same as the 05, same as the 02. Go back to obviously 71's ridiculous price, £10,000-15,000 per bottle. I just think long term, money no object. It's actually if you actually compare this 19 La Tâche, it actually is not too dissimilar to most other younger vintage La Tâche. So you're actually getting in at a pretty good price point for any vintage La Tâche.
Yeah, and so I mean, in a world and in a brand as well where its access is incredibly hard to come by, I think La Tâche stands out from that perspective, right? Because there's a little bit, at least a bit more of it, right?
Exactly. So that was my pick, and my alternative pick, which I didn't go for, in case you want to know, was Chapelle Chambertin from Cecil Tremblay.
Perfect. We will wait for the story of that another time, Tom, because we're just slightly pressed to just wrap things up.
Go on, Jay.
Yeah, I just thought that it would be worth giving a very quick shout out to Ethan from New York, who came back with some really interesting feedbacks. After the last pod,
after the Burgundy pod, I think it was
after the Burgundy pod. Sorry, yeah. So questions that we will perhaps not have time to cover, but just discussing things around whether we're really making wine approachable to the audience when we're discussing and drinking wines that are around and over £100 per bottle. I think hopefully prior to this, we've kind of covered some elements to that. I was deliberately dropping in some more valuable end of the market wines that you may want to approach. But I think it would be useful just to quickly, Sean, before we let you go, ask what was your own gateway wine, because that was something that Ethan raised was, at the approachable end of things, what was your kind of first wine you had that kind of opened your eyes to wanting to get into wine?
I think this is going to be a thoroughly disappointing answer for Ethan. I, in a slightly strange turn of events, when I was about 21, won a raffle for a bottle of 19.
Tombola.
Yeah, exactly, Tombola. Yeah, the tickets and everything. Yeah. For a bottle of 96 Mouton Rothschild.
Ex Chateau or just?
No, not ex Chateau. No. I didn't take the trip.
Which was in 3.
We'll disappoint Ethan, I'm sure,
Yeah,
because it's not the accessible gateway
But I
wine
think
you are
that,
hoping
like-
for.
No, but it is.
No,
it is what it is, right?
No,
I mean,
that's like the wine. That's like the wine that got you into wine.
yeah.
I think what his point was more kind of how do you get people from like 19 crimes
Mhm.
or like, you know, supermarket wines for like £10 a bottle. How do you get them up the scale but without going into like the super high end? But then, you know, like, you're not going back to my amazing picks, but like Il Poglione at £25 a bottle, like that, how is that not accessible to everyone?
No, it is.
And like before this pod, we were talking about like what's the average amount of money people spend on hobbies, right?
Yeah.
You know, whether it's cycling or, you know, running or football or
Golf.
whatever it might be. I mean, they're all sports related. Obviously, you can have different hobbies from that. But, you know, people in music, you know, people are spending £2,000-3,000 a year on these hobbies. So I think if your hobby is wine, you want to get into it, you know, I think spending, you know, we were saying before, like £30-40 or getting 2 or 3 of you together and splashing out on £100 bottle of wine, but 3 of us sharing that like £20-30 each. Okay, it's not US dollars, but
Yeah,
I think that's accessible for everyone. No, or maybe I'm out of touch.
No, but I spoke with Ethan. I think it's about kind of using that thinking around going forward of what we want to try and get across with this. And I think there's so many different ways around all of the aspects we've discussed of the market, let alone discussing this specific point of people getting into wine, right? And there's loads of ways to also get into wine. You're perhaps likely to have this light bulb moment with something that probably is a bit more expensive and further reaching, but ultimately there's now never been a better place to kind of come in at that entry point where, like you said, there's wines like the Il Poglione that's actually affordable, whereas, you know, previously haven't been, and wines that have come down that you could think about clubbing together to enjoy as an experience, and they're actually not as expensive as they have been for the last 5 years.
Is there like a wine under like £30 that's kind of like your go-to when you're kind of, I don't know, having a dinner party, or like maybe you've got people that you're with that don't know a lot about wine that you kind of want to not spend loads of money, but kind of show them something that, as you said, is like a little bit more than just your usual supermarket wine? Is there anything that comes to mind in terms of like your go-to?
I think Rioja's a great outlet for that. I think
sure.
Maybe these days even Bordeaux, but I think Rioja has amazing value in that Reserva category, especially. You know, £30 or even closer to 20.
Yeah.
Really, some really impressive wines.
Or even New World Pinot and Chardonnay, especially from like New Zealand. Like, I think you get such good quality at that kind of £20-30 per bottle level. That again, I think such a quick and easy way. Like, oh, it's screw caps from New Zealand. We get some really high quality wines in that category. That's not a huge amount of money. And I think someone who's not used to drinking anything above £10 will suddenly be like, whoa. You know, Jay, you said earlier about like, oh, can you actually tell the difference between a cheap wine and an expensive wine? I think that's quite a good way to take people on that kind of little bit of a journey.
Yeah. And general thoughts on the wine we had today. We've semi covered, but I thought it was consistent, showed well. Penfolds is a great brand to look out for because they do have a massive range at price point and, you know, different variations of grape. So well worth checking out if you haven't seen it. I do feel like we should probably wrap up. It's been a really interesting pod. Thank you so much for coming, Sean.
Thank you for having me.
And I think we've overturned a few stones, but there's plenty more still to turn. So Tom, do you want to wrap us up?
Absolutely. First and foremost, thank you very much for listening along with us and watching us, whether it's on Spotify or YouTube or your favorite podcast channel. We do ask one small favor from you. We do ask you to like and subscribe. But most importantly, if you want to get featured like Ethan did, then take some time out of your day to leave us a comment or email us or contact us in any way you might want. If you have interesting opinions or you maybe completely disagree with some of the things that I've said or Jonathan or Sean has, most likely going to be what I've said, then feel free to get in touch. And we're always up for lively discourse. So as I said, like, subscribe, get in touch, comment, have a great time. And I would lastly like to thank Sean Wright for coming onto the podcast and being an absolutely wonderful guest. Small round of applause for Sean.
Thank you for having me on.
And as always, Jonathan Stevenson, Jay Stevenson, the man that had picked up a beautiful town in Scotland. Yes, it is possible. And if Visit Scotland want to sponsor us on the next pod, you're more than welcome. Thank you very much for joining us and being a fantastic co-host as usual.
Guys. Yeah. Happy Friday.
It's not Friday. Goodbye.